Hello everyone, my name's Anastasia. I'm really glad you all joined me here in my living room for my discussion on the Carriage House of the Victorian Mansion, which is what I did my final project on for this class. So for this discussion, I'm going to go over the physical description of the property, the historical context, the process I took to complete my final project, and then lastly, why I think that this is a significant site to document and preserve. So let's get started. The Carriage House itself lies at 109 Danforth Street in Portland's West End. The Victorian Mansion, which is the main house, lies on the corner of Park and Danforth Street. So Park Street's right here, and then Danforth Street's right here. The Victorian Mansion sits right here, and the Carriage House lies just east of the Victorian Mansion, like right over here-ish. The Carriage House itself is a two-story structure with a gable roof, which you can see from this photograph of the south-facing facade, which is the main entrance. And on top of the roof sits a tower. It's a non-functioning tower, which you can see from that photograph right here. This tower matches the one on the Victorian Mansion and gives the Carriage House the Italianate style that the main house had become so well known for. In fact, I was flipping through an architecture book I have from a class I took last year, and right where it was talking about the Italianate style architecture in America, there was a picture of Victorian Mansion. So it's become nationally recognized as a great example of the Italianate style here in America. The original Carriage House was a brick structure covered in mastic, which was then later replaced by stucco and then scored to resemble brownstone. The Victorian Mansion itself is a mostly brownstone structure. Because brownstone is not native to Maine, it was all shipped from Portland, Connecticut, which is a weird little connection, but also meant that brownstone was really expensive in Maine. So the main house was covered in brownstone, or the main facade of the main house, and then the side facing Park Street is covered in brownstone. Because it was really a showcasing the wealth of the family that owned it. But the Carriage House, being for servants mainly, didn't have to be quite as fancy, so it was brick and then covered in mastic and then scored to fool people into thinking it might have been brownstone. Currently, only the south and the west facing facades have scored stucco on them, and we can see that right here, we can see that right here. Those are the two facades that people interact with if you're going to come visit the museum. The north and the east facing facades look out to adjoining properties. So the north facade right over here looks out onto the Carroll Mansion, which is directly behind the Victorian Mansion on Park Street. Sorry. And the east-facing facade looks out onto 101 Danforth Street, which is a condo. So that's kind of the general description of the property. I hope you have a better idea of what we're dealing with here. So let's talk about the history of the Carriage House. So the property was built between 1858 and 1860 by Henry Austin of New Haven, Connecticut, I should say. And he built a few other properties here in Maine. The Victorian Mansion is both his most well-known example in the state as well as the grandest. It was built as a summer retreat for Ruggles Sylvester Morse and his wife Olive. Both Ruggles and Olive came from relatively rural farming families here in Maine, but Ruggles made his fortune in the hotel business in New Orleans. That's where he amassed his millions. So the Victorian Mansion was really supposed to be a testament to his sort of new wealth. And you can really tell that because the house, when it was built, cost roughly 1/2 to 1/3 of his entire net worth. And so the Morses lived there until 1893, when Olive, who at this point was a widow, sold the property to the Libby family. The Libby family was from Westbrook, Maine, which is the next town over from Portland, and Joseph Libby, who was the father of the family, made his money owning a dry goods store in downtown Portland. I should say that the house originally cost between $80,000 to $100,000, and Olive sold it for somewhere in the ballpark of $30,000, so they really took a hit on the property. The Libby family lived there until 1928, when they attempted to put the house on the market, or the property on the market, And then the Great Depression hit. No one was going to buy a house that size during the Great Depression. So it sat abandoned until 1940, when Dr. William Holmes, who was a retired educator from Portland, used his entire retirement fund money to purchase the property and open it up as a museum with the help of his sister Clara. I should mention, though, that while Dr. William Holmes purchased the whole property, he didn't use the carriage house, and it fell into a real state of disarray. Even when the Libby family was living there full-time, the carriage house still wasn't used. This photo, which is from the 1924 census, which is available online at mainmemorynetwork.com, lists the condition of the carriage house as bad. So even before the property was abandoned, the carriage house had fallen into disuse and disrepair. The carriage house itself was practically ignored until 1984, when the Victorian Society, who at that point had the control of the property, leased out the carriage house to the Portland Design Team, which is an architect firm here in town. I'm going to refer to the Portland Design Team as PDT from here on out. That's the name that they go by on their website, as office space. And as part of this leasing, the PDT firm agreed to do major renovations on the carriage house. This is a photo of some of those restorations being done. And here are photos of the finished product. So this is the interior, which you can see is office space. And then this is the exterior. They replaced the windows and doors. They re-stuccoed the front portion, the west portion, and the west side, I believe, as well. And they replaced some of the original shutters that were on the doors and the windows with these vinyl shutters as well. In 1996, the PDT firm left the space and gave it back to the Victorian Society, who have used it ever since as a gift shop as well as office space and conference space on the upper levels. I should also mention that at this point in time, the Victorian Society has changed its name to Victoria Mansion Incorporated, so that is the same entity but different name. So that's the history, and that was all very intriguing for me. I give tours of the Victorian Mansion as well, so I am pretty familiar with the carriage house, and which means it seemed like the perfect option for my final project. So let me just talk to you a little bit about that as well. So this project was hugely daunting for me. I have never sketched, I have never measured a building, I have never drawn a building, and so I was really kind of freaked out by this whole process. Luckily for the measuring and sketching part, I got some help from the people who work at the Victorian Mansion who were able to hold the measuring tape for me so I could get some of those measurements where I couldn't reach. I also used a ladder. I was able to find drawings from the renovations that the PDT firm did that were scaled, so I was able to measure those drawings and try to confirm my measurements in that way. But I was actually really surprised by the lack of information on the carriage house. I rummaged through the original historical architectural buildings, or the original HAB's report from the Victorian Mansion, and really there was nothing on the carriage house at all. It was, you know, totally glossed over. I think even in a mass report like the HAB's report in the Victorian Mansion, the carriage house was seen just as a blip. So that was really my process for measuring, is getting the help of others, using ladders, and then definitely cross-referencing with the renovation plans from the PDT firm. So then for my final drawing part, and this was the most scary for me, I used the student examples that were listed on the blackboard, and just kind of, you know, obsessively checked my drawings to theirs, and of course was disappointed in my own efforts. It was really, really hard. This whole process just was, I knew it was going to be hard, but it was harder than I thought it was going to be as well. I used an entire sketchbook trying to draw these the facades and the floor plans, making sure my lines were straight and scaled correctly, and the final product still wasn't totally what I wanted it to be. And so it would take a lot of practice for me to feel comfortable doing these final drawings. I am glad, however, that this class gave me the opportunity to try something that I literally had no experience in and really didn't know anything about whatsoever. And so this is a picture of the floor plan. I did have interior access to the Victoria Carriage house as well. And measuring that, I should also mention, was pretty hard, as, you know, there are shelves, and the carriage house wasn't actually closed for the season, so there were people milling about, and so that was kind of difficult as well. So let me just close by talking about why I would choose the carriage house. And it isn't just necessarily the fact that I've worked at the Victoria Mansion and that the carriage house was the right size for the project. I really appreciate the story of the Victoria Mansion and the carriage house as a whole, the whole property. And this is a photo of the main house, and then the carriage house is right there in the back. I think this is, you know, one of the better rags to riches stories I've heard of how a property can be completely transformed because of, you know, the interest in historic buildings and in preservation and restoration. You know, in the mid-20th century, this building was, you know, just completely disused. In 1940, before Dr. William Holmes bought the property, it was slated for demolition. They were going to build a gas station right here. And in the last 20 to 30 years, really, is when all the efforts have been made to start restoring the structure as well as the carriage house. And so I really get to see sort of how important it is to be accurate when you're doing preservation, and how just, you know, completely life-changing it could be for a structure to have that invested interest in it. And the Victoria Mansion has become well known across, you know, the country, and we have visitors from all over the world as well. And the carriage house, you know, in its own little story, has the same kind of arc. You know, it was abandoned. Even from the 20s it was abandoned. You know, I saw pictures of the carriage house before the PDT renovation, and oh my goodness, it was falling apart. There was this like caution, no trespassing sign. It was dangerous. I mean, it was, you know, literally about to collapse. And then through the work of the PDT firm, it has been structuralized, it's been restored to as close to the original as one can afford to do it right now. And more importantly, it's a functional structure. I mean, it's used for offices, it's used for the gift shop, so it isn't just this sort of pretty little building. It is a sort of living thing. It still has its place in history. It still is, you know, it's one thing that kind of bugs me a little bit about when people preserve houses is if they just kind of leave them. Do you know what I mean? Like enclosed in glass. Like, it's a pretty thing, but it's not a real thing. It's you know, a historic log cabin which you can take tours of, but it's not. It doesn't have a purpose. It's just there to look at. And the carriage house certainly has a purpose, and that purpose has been able to be established through preservation and through restoration. And so that's really why I chose this structure to document and, you know, talk about with you guys today. So thank you so much. Have a great night.